Emma sat quietly beside her little brother's hospital bed, holding his small hand in hers. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, casting gentle shadows across the white sheets. 10-year-old Oliver had been sick for most of his life with a condition that made his muscles very weak. The doctors had explained it to their parents in big words that Emma didn't fully understand, but she knew it meant Oliver couldn't run and play like other children his age. But Oliver never let that stop his big dreams. His hospital room was filled with pictures of rockets, planets, and astronauts floating in space. He had books about the moon landing scattered across his bedside table, and a small telescope sat by the window that their grandfather had given him for his last birthday. "Emma," Oliver whispered, his eyes bright with excitement as he looked at the space poster on his hospital wall. It showed a massive rocket launching into a starry sky, with flames shooting from its base and white clouds of steam surrounding it. "When I get better, will you take me to see a real rocket launch? I want to be an astronaut someday and fly to Mars." Emma felt her heart break a little, but she smiled warmly at her brother. At 16, she knew how serious Oliver's illness was, even if he didn't fully understand. She had heard the doctors talking to their parents late at night when they thought the children were asleep. She knew about the treatments that weren't working as well as they hoped, and the worried looks that crossed their mother's face when she thought no one was watching, but seeing the hope in his eyes, the pure joy and excitement that lit up his pale face, Emma made a promise that would change both their lives forever. "I promise, Oliver, when you're feeling stronger, we'll go together. We'll watch those rockets fly up to the stars, just like you dreamed about." Oliver's face broke into the biggest smile Emma had seen in weeks. He squeezed her hand with what little strength he had, his fingers warm and small in hers. "Promise, really promise." "I promise with all my heart," Emma said, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill from her eyes. She leaned down and kissed his forehead gently. "We'll see the biggest, most amazing rocket launch ever. And maybe we'll even meet some real astronauts." Oliver's eyes grew wide with wonder. "Do you think they would tell me what it's like to float in space?" "I'm sure they would," Emma replied, stroking his thin brown hair. "They would probably love to meet someone who dreams as big as you do." From that day forward, the promise became their shared dream. Every doctor's visit, every difficult night when Oliver couldn't sleep because of the pain, every small victory when he had enough energy to sit up and eat his favorite soup, everything was measured against that future trip to see the rockets. Emma would bring Oliver new books about space exploration from the library. They would spend hours looking at pictures of Saturn's rings and learning about the International Space Station. Oliver would tell her about the different planets and which ones might have aliens living on them. Emma would listen carefully to every word, asking questions and sharing in his excitement. "Did you know that Jupiter is so big that all the other planets could fit inside it?" Oliver would say, his voice getting stronger when he talked about space. "No way," Emma would reply, even though she had heard this fact at least 10 times before. She loved seeing him happy and animated. They would plan their adventure together down to the smallest detail. Oliver wanted to bring his camera to take pictures of everything. Emma promised they would buy special t-shirts to wear to the launch. They even picked out which snacks they would pack for the long drive to the space center. Their parents, James and Helen, watched their children with both pride and worry. They saw how Emma had grown up too fast, taking care of her little brother when other teenagers her age were worried about school dances, football games, and weekend plans with friends. James would find Emma reading space books in the hospital waiting room while Oliver had his treatments. Helen would watch her daughter carefully cut out newspaper articles about upcoming rocket launches, saving them in a special folder that she kept by Oliver's bed. You don't have to spend all your time here. Their mother would say gently, you should be out with your friends, being a normal teenager. But Emma didn't mind. Oliver was her world, and their promise was the light that kept them both going through the darkest days, when Oliver cried from the pain of his treatments. Emma would hold his hand and describe the rocket launch they would see together. When he was too weak to hold his books, she would read to him about brave astronauts exploring new worlds. The promise gave them both something to look forward to. Something beautiful and exciting in a world that often felt scary and uncertain. It was their secret source of hope, their shared dream that made everything else seem possible. Every night before she went home, Emma would squeeze Oliver's hand 3 times. It was their special signal that meant I love you. And every night, Oliver would squeeze back 3 times, holding onto his sister's promise and the dream that kept his spirit soaring among the stars. Emma threw herself into making their dream come true with the determination of someone who had found her life's purpose. Every day after school, she would rush to her job at Morrison's grocery store on the corner of their street. She stacked shelves, helped customers find what they needed, and swept the floors until they sparkled. Every penny she earned went straight into a special jar she kept hidden under her bed. Labeled Oliver's rocket dream in her careful handwriting, the Space Center was hundreds of miles away from their small town in Yorkshire. Emma had calculated the cost down to the last pound. They would need money for petrol, a hotel room for 2 nights, meals on the road, and most importantly, the special viewing tickets that would get them close enough to feel the rumble of the rockets as they launched into the sky. It was more money than their family had ever saved for something like this, especially with all of Oliver's medical bills taking up most of what their parents earned. Emma, you don't have to do this, her mother Helen said one evening, finding her daughter asleep over mathematics homework at the kitchen table. Emma's blonde hair had fallen across her textbook, and there were dark circles under her eyes. From working late shifts at the store, you're working hard, love. You're still just a child yourself. But Emma lifted her head and looked at her mother with eyes that seemed much older than her 16. Yes, I made Oliver a promise, Mom. I'm going to keep it. He believes in me, and I won't let him down. Helen felt her heart ache as she watched her daughter carry such a heavy burden. She wanted to tell Emma that it was too much, that she couldn't possibly save enough money and time, that maybe they should find a smaller dream to chase. But she could see the fierce love and determination in Emma's eyes, and she knew that nothing would stop her daughter from trying. Emma researched everything she could find about space centers and rocket launches. She spent her lunch breaks at school in the library, reading about NASA and the European Space Agency. She learned when the next big launch would be, studied the different types of rockets, and found out exactly how much the special viewing tickets would cost. She even started studying astronomy in her spare time, borrowing books from the library and watching videos online so she could share Oliver's passion and make their trip even more special. She bought a small notebook and filled it with facts about space that she could share with Oliver. She learned about how rockets work, what astronauts eat in space, and how long it takes to travel to different planets. Every new fact she discovered felt like a gift she could give to her little brother. Some days brought hope and joy that made all her hard work feel worthwhile. Oliver would have enough energy to sit up in his hospital bed, and Emma would carefully carry in the small telescope she had bought with her very first paycheck from the grocery store. They would position it by the window, and together they would look at the moon's craters and try to spot different constellations in the night sky. Look, Emma, Oliver would whisper excitedly, pointing at a bright star. That's Jupiter. I can see it moving across the sky. Emma would smile and nod. Even though she wasn't entirely sure which dot of light was Jupiter and which was just an airplane. What mattered was the wonder in Oliver's voice and the way his whole face lit up when he talked about the stars and planets. They would imagine traveling to distant planets together, discussing what it might feel like to walk on Mars or float weightlessly round Saturn's rings. Oliver would describe the spaceship they would build, complete with a special room where Emma could read her books while they traveled through the galaxy. Other days were much harder. Oliver would be too tired to lift his head from his pillow, too weak to eat the soup their mother brought, too sick to even keep his eyes open. On those days, Emma would sit quietly beside his bed, holding his thin hand and reading space facts from her notebook until he fell asleep. She would whisper stories about brave astronauts and amazing discoveries, hoping that somehow her words could carry him away from the pain. Even if just for a few minutes, you're going to burn yourself out. Her father James warned one evening when he found Emma still awake at midnight, counting the money in a jar for the 100th time. Your grades are dropping. Emma, you barely have time for yourself anymore. This is too much pressure for someone your age. James loved his daughter's dedication, but he worried that she was sacrificing her own teenagers, her own dreams and friendships, all for a promise that might be impossible to keep. He watched her move through each day like a much older person, carrying responsibilities that seemed too heavy for her young shoulders. But Emma couldn't give up. Every time she felt tired, every time her back ached from stacking heavy boxes at the store, every time she wanted to just be a normal teenager, worried about exams and friends, she would remember Oliver's excited face when she made that promise. She would think about his thin fingers squeezing hers and his whispered question, promise. She had to make it happen. She had to show him that dreams really could come true, that promises really could be kept, that love really was strong enough to move mountains, or in this case, strong enough to get them both to see rockets soar into the sky. Month by month, her savings grew slowly but steadily. The rocket launch tickets were finally, amazingly, within reach. Emma held the envelope in her shaking hands, barely able to believe what was inside. 2 tickets to watch the biggest rocket launch of the year at the Kennedy Space Center. The glossy papers felt smooth between her fingers, and she could see the official stamps and logos that made them real. After 7 long months of working every day after school, counting every single penny, and dreaming about this moment, she had finally done it. She had walked out of the travel agency that morning with tears of joy in her eyes, the woman behind. The counter had smiled when Emma counted out the exact amount in crumpled notes and coins from her special jar. Someone's going to have an amazing time, the woman had said, not knowing that these weren't just tickets, but the fulfillment of the most important promise Emma had ever made, all the way to the hospital. Emma practiced how she would surprise Oliver. She imagined his face lighting up when she showed him the tickets. She pictured him jumping up in bed, as much as his weak body would allow, and throwing his arms round her neck. She thought about how they would spend the next few days planning every detail of their trip, looking at maps of the Space Center and deciding which astronaut exhibits they wanted to see first. But when she arrived at the hospital that Tuesday afternoon, something felt different. The usual cheerful noise of the children's ward seemed quieter somehow. The nurses at the desk looked up at her with sad smiles instead of their normal bright greetings. Emma felt a cold fear creeping up her spine as she walked down the familiar hallway toward Oliver's room. Outside Oliver's door, she could see her parents talking to Dr. Williams and to other doctors she didn't recognize. Their voices were so low she couldn't make out the words, but she could see her mother's shoulders shaking. Her father had his arm round her mother, and both of them looked like they had been crying. Emma stopped walking, the envelope with her precious tickets suddenly felt heavy in her hands, like it was made of stone instead of paper. Emma, Dr. Williams said gently when he noticed her standing there. He was a kind man with grey hair who had taken care of Oliver since he was very small. Emma had always liked him because he talked to Oliver like he was a smart person, not just a sick little boy. But today, his face looked older and sadder than she had ever seen it. Oliver's condition has gotten worse, much worse. His body isn't responding to the treatments anymore. The words hit Emma like a physical blow, like someone had punched her in the stomach and knocked all the air out of her lungs. She felt the hospital hallway tilting round her, and she had to put her hand against the wall to keep from falling down. "What does that mean?" she whispered. Even though part of her already knew the answer, she had heard these kinds of conversations before. Late at night, when her parents thought she was asleep, Dr. Williams looked at her parents, then back at Emma. His voice was very gentle, like he was talking to a frightened animal. We think it's time to focus on making him comfortable. He has maybe a few weeks, perhaps a month if we're very lucky." Emma felt the world spinning round her like she was on a terrible carnival ride that wouldn't stop. The bright hospital lights seemed too loud, and the smell of disinfectant made her feel sick. She looked down at the envelope in her hands, then through the open door at Oliver sleeping peacefully in his bed. He looked so small under the white sheets, surrounded by all his space posters and model rockets. His favorite book about Mars exploration was open beside him, and his little hand was resting on a picture of astronauts floating in space. All those months of work, all those late nights stacking shelves at the grocery store, all those dreams and plans and excited conversations about what they would see and do, all of it was for nothing. The rocket launch was still 3 weeks away, but Oliver would be there to see it. "I promised him," Emma said. And suddenly tears were streaming down her face so fast she couldn't stop them. "I promised we'd see the rockets together. I promised we'd watch them fly up to the stars." Her father put his strong arm round her shoulders and pulled her close. She could smell his familiar scent of soap and coffee, and she buried her face against his chest like she used to do when she was small and scared of thunderstorms. "You did everything you could, love," he said softly. "More than anyone could have expected. You worked so hard for him." But Emma felt like she had failed the one person who mattered most to her in the whole world. The tickets in her hands felt like pieces of paper mocking her now, reminding her of a promise she couldn't keep. She sat down heavily in the chair beside Oliver's bed, watching his chest rise and fall with each breath. His face looked peaceful in sleep, and she could see him dreaming behind his closed eyelids. She sat there for hours, holding those tickets that had once represented hope and joy but now felt like the heaviest things in the world. The afternoon sun moved across the hospital room, casting long shadows on the floor. Oliver slept on, unaware that his biggest dream had just become impossible. How do you tell someone that their biggest dream will never come true? How do you admit that you couldn't keep the most important promise you ever made? Oliver was awake when Emma visited the next day. Though he looked smaller and more fragile than ever before, his thin body seemed to disappear into the white hospital sheets, and his face was paler than usual, but his eyes were still bright and alert, still holding that spark of curiosity that had always made him special. The moment Emma walked into the room, he noticed something was different about her. "Emma, why do you look so worried?" he asked in his soft voice, which had grown even quieter over the past few weeks. "You have that same look Mum gets when she thinks I'm not watching her." Emma tried to force a cheerful smile onto her face, the kind she had practiced in the mirror 100 times before visiting Oliver. She wanted to pretend everything was fine, to keep protecting him from the hard truths that surrounded them. But Oliver had always been too smart for his own good. wise beyond his tenures in a way that sometimes made Emma forget how young he really was. "I'm fine, Oliver," she said. But her voice cracked slightly on the words. She sat down in the familiar chair beside his bed, the same chair where she had spent countless hours reading to him and sharing stories about distant planets. Oliver studied her face carefully. The way he used to examine his telescope when he was trying to focus it perfectly on the moon. "You're sad about our rocket trip, aren't you?" he said quietly, and it wasn't really a question. He already knew the answer. Emma felt her carefully constructed smile crumble away completely. She couldn't lie to him, not when he was looking at her with those understanding eyes that seemed to see right through her. Tears filled her eyes as she nodded slowly, unable to speak the words out loud, but instead of being upset or disappointed. Oliver surprised her completely. He reached for her hand with movements that were slow and deliberate, as if each gesture took great effort. When his small fingers wrapped round hers, he had the most gentle smile on his face. "Emma, don't be sad," he said, squeezing her hand with what little strength he had left. "You already gave me everything I wanted. You already took me on the most amazing journey anyone could ever have." Emma looked at him with confusion, wiping tears from her cheeks with her free hand. "What do you mean, Oliver? We never got to go anywhere. We never saw the rockets. I couldn't keep my promise to you." Oliver's smile grew even brighter, and for a moment he looked just like the healthy, excited little boy he had been before he got so sick. "But that's not true at all. Every story you told me about space, every picture you showed me from those books you brought, every night we sat together looking at stars through the telescope, every time you described what it would be like to float in zero gravity, that was my journey. You took me to space every single day." Emma felt fresh tears coming, but this time they were different. They weren't tears of sadness and failure, but something else entirely. Something that felt almost like relief mixed with a love so strong. It made her chest ache. Oliver continued talking, his voice growing more excited as he spoke. "Remember when you told me about the astronauts who walked on the moon? I could see it so clearly in my mind. I felt like I was there with them, bouncing round in the low gravity and looking back at Earth. And when you showed me those pictures of the space station, I imagined myself floating through those tunnels, looking out the windows at all the stars and planets spinning by." He paused to catch his breath, but his eyes never left Emma's face. "I need you to promise me something new, okay? Something even more important than rocket launches." Emma leaned closer to him, hanging on every word. "What is it, Oliver? I'll promise you anything. Promise me you'll follow your own dreams now. Not just mine, but yours too. Promise me you'll remember that love is the strongest force in the universe. Stronger than any rocket engine ever built. It can carry people farther than any spaceship, and it lasts longer than any star." "Oliver," Emma whispered, but he wasn't finished yet. "And promise me you'll help other kids dream big, like you helped me. There are so many children in this hospital who need someone to show them the stars and tell them stories about adventures they can have, even if they can't leave their beds. That's how I'll keep flying to the stars, Emma, through all the dreams you help come true for other kids just like me." Emma nodded through her tears, understanding for the first time that Oliver wasn't just a little brother anymore. Somehow, despite his illness, despite never leaving the hospital for more than a few hours at a time, he had become one of the wisest people she had ever known. 3 days later, on a quiet Thursday morning when the sun was streaming through his hospital room window, Oliver passed away peacefully in his sleep. Emma was holding his hand, just like she had done so many times before. and she was whispering stories about distant galaxies and brave astronauts exploring new worlds. His last breath came while she was describing a beautiful planet where children could run and play among fields of flowers that grew as tall as trees dotted the funeral. Surrounded by family and friends and nurses who had cared for Oliver over the years, Emma realized that her little brother had taught her something incredible. Sometimes the most important promises aren't the ones we think we're making when we speak the words out loud. Sometimes the real promises are the ones we fulfill without even knowing it, through love and time and the simple act of being there for someone who needs us. Oliver had received his journey to the stars after all, and Emma had kept her promise in ways she never could have imagined. 2 years later, Emma sat in a bright lecture hall at Manchester University, surrounded by thick textbooks about physics and mathematics. She was studying aerospace engineering, learning about the same rockets and spacecraft that she and Oliver had dreamed about together. The professor was explaining how fuel systems work in space shuttles, and Emma found herself thinking about her little brother, wondering what questions he would have asked about the complex diagrams on the whiteboard. She had won a scholarship to university after writing an essay about how her brother had inspired her to reach for the stars. The essay had been difficult to write, full of memories that still made her cry. But it had also been healing. She wrote about Oliver's courage, his endless curiosity about the universe, and how he had taught her that dreams could come true in unexpected ways. The scholarship committee had been so moved by her story that they offered her full scholarship to study whatever she wanted. Every week, Emma would pack a small bag with books, star charts, and a portable telescope, and make her way back to the children's hospital where Oliver had spent so much of his short life. The nurses remembered her and always smiled when she arrived. They had watched her grow from a worried teenager into a confident young woman who seemed to carry sunshine with her wherever she went. She had started a program called Journey to the Stars where she would spend time with young patients who were too sick to leave the hospital. She would sit beside their beds, just like someone had once sat beside Oliver's, and share stories about space exploration and the wonders of the universe. "Tell us about the rocket ships again," Emma called out Lucy, a 7-year-old girl with bright eyes and a smile that reminded Emma so much of Oliver it sometimes took her breath away. Lucy had been in the hospital for 3 months with a serious heart condition, but she never complained and always asked the most thoughtful questions about space. Emma smiled and settled into the chair beside Lucy's bed. Round them, other children in the ward had gathered to listen, some sitting up in their beds, others too weak to do anything but turn their heads toward Emma's voice. There was Thomas, age 9, who dreamed of building rockets. There was Sarah, age 6, who wanted to be the first person to visit Jupiter. And there was little Michael, only 4 years old, who mostly just liked looking at pictures of Earth taken from space. Emma began describing how rockets work, using simple words that even the youngest children could understand. She explained how they break free from Earth's gravity through the power of burning fuel, creating enough force to push them up through the atmosphere and into the vast emptiness of space. But as she spoke, she remembered Oliver's words about love being stronger than any rocket, and she realized she was describing something much bigger than just machines and suns. The really amazing thing, Emma told the children, is that rockets teach us that anything is possible if we have enough hope and determination. They show us that even the biggest dreams can come true if we never stop believing in them. She brought out her telescope and helped each child look through it at whatever they could see from the hospital window. Sometimes it was just the moon during the day, looking like a pale ghost in the blue sky. Sometimes they could spot Venus or Jupiter, tiny dots of light that represented entire worlds waiting to be explored. On the 2nd anniversary of Oliver's death, Emma made a decision that had taken her 2 years to feel ready for. She drove to the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, carrying one of the original rocket launch tickets she had bought with her savings from the grocery store. The other tickets stayed at home in a special box with Oliver's favorite space books and his small telescope. The launch was everything she and Oliver had imagined it would be. The massive rocket stood on the launch pad like a white tower reaching toward the clouds. Thousands of people had gathered to watch, all of them looking up with the same sense of wonder that Oliver had always carried in his eyes. When the countdown reached 0 and the rocket engines ignited, Emma felt the ground shake beneath her feet. Flames shot out from the base of the rocket, creating a pillar of fire and smoke that seemed to connect the earth to the sky, slowly at first, then faster and faster. The rocket rose into the blue morning sky, carrying astronauts toward the International Space Station. As the rocket disappeared into the heavens, becoming just a small dot of light against the endless blue. Emma felt Oliver's presence beside her as clearly as if he were standing right there holding her. And she understood now that she had kept her promise after all, just not in the way she had originally planned. "Thank you, Oliver," she whispered to the sky, tears streaming down her face, but with a smile on her lips. "You taught me that real promises aren't about places we go or things we see. They're about the love we carry in our hearts and share with others every day." Emma looked up at the endless expanse of sky, knowing that somewhere among the stars, Oliver was still dreaming, still exploring, still inspiring her to help other children reach for the impossible. She had learned that when we truly love someone, we never really lose them. They live on in every dream we chase, every kindness we show to others, and every moment we choose hope over despair. Love truly is the strongest force in the universe, more powerful than any rocket ever built.